After 4 rounds of the 2025 Formula One season, Lewis Hamilton has laid claim that he's finally begun to understand how not only to set his Ferrari SF-25 up, but also how to actually drive it. And we should take him at face value on those statements, because after the Bahrain Grand Prix, we could quite clearly see Hamilton has started to get to grips with how to drive it, particularly when we study the lap times that he was able to produce during it. Not only that, but also the average pace deficit to that of his teammate Charles Leclerc. Now, it is quite safe to say the start of Hamilton's Ferrari career has not been plain sailing for a multitude of reasons. We've had the disqualification in China, we've had the overall setup issues within the SF-25, and then we've had the indifferent revver, as well as the format changes throughout the opening first 4 rounds. We had a wet weather race in Melbourne, followed by that sprint race weekend in China. So a very limited amount of time, truthfully, for Hamilton to fully get to grips on it. But last weekend in Bahrain, things started to click into place, and Hamilton's statements also paint the same picture, particularly when you consider how he describes the methods through which he would set the SF-25 of his up throughout a Grand Prix weekend. The structure he would take, it was quite a different approach to that of his teammate Leclerc. And he believes he will then take into consideration all of the learnings and come up with a brand new approach when we head to Saudi Arabia for this weekend. Now, on the preparations across a weekend, Hamilton had this to say about it.
I think what's clear is that Charles starts with a setup and he stays with it pretty much all weekend, and I was a long way away from him last weekend and this weekend. And just before qualifying I go close to him, but then all the settings are all off. I haven't. So yeah, I got to do a better job through the weekend. I know I can, and I will.
So quite clearly Hamilton has taken into consideration the approach Leclerc takes in terms of having a base setup and not really drifting too drastically away from it, while in comparison to his teammate, Hamilton has started in one place and kind of zigzagged his way through different methods of setting up the SF-25 to look for a better comfortability within the SF-25. And of course, when we're talking about that, we're talking about how the car's sensations are coming to him, how confident and comfortable he is in the SF-25, and how much it is in terms of a natural process of driving the car, not having to second guess how it's going to behave in different corners, through the corner entry, mid-corner and corner exit. And all of these things play a role in the overall competitiveness you can have within a Formula One Grand Prix weekend. And of course, away from just setting a car up and changing that approach to be more similar to that of Leclerc, he is also looking, and it seems from his own words, found a way through which he has to drive this SF-25. He started to get a handle and an understanding of what he needs to do and the settings in terms of changes he needs to make in comparison to what he was used to in Mercedes. And on that particular point, Hamilton had this to say of it.
I think what's clear is, I mean, us as humans, I guess we get really stuck in our ways. And I think I've been driving a certain style in a certain way with the same team for such a long time. I've moved to a new car, and it requires such different driving style and settings. Like I'm using engine braking, which we never ever used in my previous year. Much different brakes if you're on Brembos, and I've been on CIs for the last 15 years or so. And this car just requires a much different driving style, and so I'm adjusting to that, and I think I am slowly getting it into my head.
So again, it's a case of these things taking time, learnings need to be had, And then the learnings need to be applied to every weekend moving forward till you get into a better kind of operational working pattern, so to say. And he also made mention of having to run engine settings completely different to how he was in Mercedes. The Ferrari car needs a totally different setting with regards to that particular thing. And all of these things quite naturally are going to seem foreign to him at first, and he would of course fall back on his experience in Mercedes, and therefore it takes time just to figure out and go through these processes. Now if we actually look at his Bahrain Grand Prix as a whole, but also to split it up into the 3 stints that he did in it, we see an interesting trend. One of those was across all of the drivers during the race, he had the least amount of degradation on the medium tyre out of the whole field. Something along the lines of 0.05. So literally zero degradation for that tyre for him, which is a positive to have, quite frankly. It's something he has been known to have. He's been exceptional on tyres, particularly the Pirelli tyres, just before we came to the end of the previous generation of F1 cars before this ground effect era. So if he can get back to that, that would be fantastic. Now, in terms of lap times and just the lap time deficit that I mentioned at the beginning of this video over that of Leclerc, he was on average only 0.3 slower per lap than Leclerc, and that is a vastly improved deficit. Now, there's one thing we have to touch on here, and that is the qualifying situation, the qualifying difficulties that Hamilton seems to have. And I believe personally it is a ground effect error handicap he has. His driving style, his way of being late on the brakes, it just doesn't work in this ground effect error. It isn't indicative of being able to bring the maximum performance in a qualifying situation. And I think that is a trend we have now seen for quite a few years. Even I would say during the first couple of years of Russell's time in Mercedes, when they were very much close in terms of the qualifying head-to-head. And I think as Russell got more comfortable in the Mercedes car, he upped his pace rather than Hamilton actually losing any of his raw pace. I believe it is a trait and a negative impact of this ground effect error. And it's going to be very interesting from next year onwards to see whether this trend continues. Because of course, if it does continue, we can then firmly say it can be established Hamilton has lost that raw pace that he's always had throughout his career. And it isn't something to be shocked about. He is heading into his 40s now, and things do naturally start to go away from you as a Formula One driver. And this goes for every human being, the further into the age ranges that we have as humans. So sometimes for Formula One drivers, different aspects of their talents leave them first. For example, some drivers can lose the overall raw speed that they have inherently. Others lose a little bit of reaction time, and others can lose a little bit of the peripheral vision. They can't see out the corners of their eyes in the same manner they did in their earlier years in the sport. So it could just be a case of that particular thing coming into effect. But there's one thing for certain, I believe, and we're going to see it as the season progresses. His race pace and his racecraft in particular has not left him. He is still the same driver that he always was. And I think we saw that in the Chinese sprint race. He took the pole position on the Friday, drove a faultless race on the Saturday, and led the field quite comfortably in the end, finishing where he started. So in closing, I think if Hamilton can absolutely get onto terms with how to drive the car and the best approach to take in terms of setting the car up, he is very much going to have this positive trend, a positive curve of improvement in terms of his overall race pace in comparison to that of his teammate, and potentially maybe even go a little bit quicker than him. And that is something to pay a lot of attention to throughout this season. And that is where I'm going to end this video, guys. Hope you've all enjoyed it. If you have, do of course leave a like on this video. Subscribe if you're new and have enjoyed the content here. And I will catch all of you else later on this week with some more F1 videos. See you then.